Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 8. The Death Day Party. October arrived before Hermione knew it, spreading a damp chill over the grounds and into the castle. Madame Pomfrey, the nurse, was kept busy by a sudden spate of colds among the staff and students. Her pepper-up potion worked instantly, though it left the drinkers smoking at the ears for several hours afterwards. Ginny, who had been looking pale, was bullied, thankfully, into taking some by Percy. The steam pouring from under her vivid red hair gave the impression that her whole head was on fire. Hermione was worried about her. Ginny didn't seem to be fitting in at Hogwarts, regardless of whether or not she was sick. Hermione barely saw her except at meals. She was worried Ginny was ignoring her because she didn't stand up to Ron that day that they were playing wizard's chess. Every time she had a chance to bring it up, Ginny seemed to disappear from the room. Raindrops the size of bullets thundered on the castle windows for days on end. The lake rose, the flower beds turned into muddy streams, and Hagrid's pumpkins swelled to the size of garden sheds. Oliver Wood's enthusiasm for regular training sessions, Hermione noticed, was not dampened. Harry seemed to always be on the Quidditch pitch for practice. Frankly, Hermione was worried about his schoolwork and made sure she was still available to help him. And by help, she didn't mean completely do his work. Ron never followed through with asking Oliver Wood whether or not he would try out to be an alternative for the team. So that left Hermione alone with him. Hermione supposed this was another reason Ginny was staying away from her, since she knew Ginny had no desire to be friends with her brother. Hermione was doing her best to see it that way, and not come to any rash conclusions as to why Ginny was keeping her distance. The added time with Ron provided added insults from the snarky redhead. Every possible chance he got, Ron would make fun of Hermione for liking Lockhart. He and Hermione were commonly seen throughout the castle bickering. Hermione took refuge from Ron's annoyance, either in the library or the second-floor girls' lavatory. It was one of the gloomiest, most depressing bathrooms Hermione had ever set foot in, but that made it more likely she'd be uninterrupted. Under a large, cracked, and spotted mirror were a row of chipped sinks. The floor was constantly damp, and the wooden doors to the stalls were flaking and scratched. One of them was dangling off its hinges. The bathroom aesthetics were definitely not the appeal. Hermione's friend Myrtle was the resident ghost in that area of the castle. Myrtle, or Moaning Myrtle as most others called her, was a squat student with pimples and thick glasses. She died in 1943 and became a ghost, wearing her school uniform as well as her glasses for eternity. She could travel within all of the Hogwarts bathrooms, but tended to stay in that particular one. Hermione had met Myrtle the previous year, and the two developed a friendship. Myrtle was a Ravenclaw when she was alive and liked to discuss Hermione's schoolwork with her, which was just fine with Hermione. After a particularly bitter exchange with Ron, Hermione decided to pay her friend a visit, the first of the year. Myrtle was the best person to practice her social awareness with, because she could take the littlest things as a personal affront. "Myrtle, Myrtle, are you here?" Hermione called out as she tried to find a dry spot to put her bag down. "Oh, now you come to visit me," Myrtle moaned as she swooped up through one of the toilets. "It's only been a month since the term started." "I'm sorry," Hermione said. "I've been busy." "That's what they all say," Myrtle said. "How's your summer, Myrtle?" Hermione said, changing the subject. She suspected most people avoided Myrtle because of her tendency to whine and be so negative. Still, it was just a matter of redirecting Myrtle's annoyance to a conversation she enjoyed. "Dreadful," Myrtle answered, but flew over to sit near Hermione, which was always a good sign. She leaned in as if to tell Hermione a secret. But I just found out that Sir Nicholas was rejected for the headless hunt, which put me in a much better mood, she said with a cackle. Why would they reject him? Hermione asked. Sir Nicholas, or Nearly Headless Nick, as the students referred to him, was the resident Gryffindor ghost. I suppose because he's only nearly headless. Nearly headless, Myrtle answered simply. He has been moping around the castle for hours now. Poor Sir Nicholas, Hermione said. Serves him right. He and Peeves have been bothering me all summer. I'm sorry, Myrtle, Hermione said. Now that you're finally here, you should tell me about the new defense against the dark art professor, Myrtle giggled. Professor Lockhart? Yes, she said. He's dreamy. Oh, he's brilliant and brave, too. He was a Ravenclaw when he went to Hogwarts, Hermione added. What was his name again? Myrtle asked. Gilderoy Lockhart, Hermione repeated. He would have been a student at Hogwarts starting in 1975, Myrtle finished. I remember him. He was always very vain. He was always upset that no one thought he was special, except he wasn't special. Well, Hermione said, he is very special. Extraordinary, in fact. Professor Lockhart has done so many things for the wizarding world. Are you sure we're talking about the same wizard? Myrtle asked. She shrugged. Maybe he changed. His looks have gotten better, that's for sure. Yes, he has definitely done a lot of the wizarding world. Yes, he has definitely done a lot for the wizarding world, Hermione said, purposefully ignoring the last part about Lockhart's looks. He always practiced memory charms in the fourth floor boys' lavatory. I would sneak through the pipes and spy on him, Myrtle continued. I'm surprised he is a defense against the dark arts professor. I always thought he'd go into charms. He's much too brave for charms, Hermione said dreamily, before collecting her things again. Whatever you say, Myrtle said, flying off across the room. I think you just like him. I do not, Hermione insisted. You do so. Hermione and Lockhart sitting in a tree. Myrtle started to sing. Hermione's cheeks burned. Shut up, Hermione screamed, startling both Myrtle and herself. There was a long, silent pause. Suddenly, Myrtle broke out into a horrendous wail. Everyone is so mean to me, even you, and I thought you were my friend. Hermione felt horrible for snapping at her, but knew Myrtle was overreacting, as she quite frequently did. I am your friend, Myrtle, she said. No, you just come here because no one else likes you. Hermione felt as though Myrtle had hit her. Tears welled in her eyes. Hermione hurriedly started to gather her things to leave. Fine, just leave me all alone like everyone else, cried Myrtle. I have to go help Ron with his homework, that's all, Hermione said as she got up, hoping Myrtle couldn't hear the emotion in her voice. Myrtle made a face and crossed her arms. I promise I'll come back soon, though, she added in a fake voice. We'll see about that, Myrtle sneered as she dove into the last toilet on the right. Hermione sighed and hurried out of the bathroom. It took a while for Hermione to calm down and think rationally about the exchange. Myrtle had always been slightly rude, but never that malicious. Was it even worth it to visit Myrtle anymore? Hermione weighed the pros and cons. On the one hand, she had considered Myrtle a good friend last year. On the other hand, Myrtle was kind of right. Hermione had only developed that friendship with her because she was lonely. Now that Hermione had Ron, Harry, Neville, Parvati, and Ginny as her friends, Did she really need to subject herself to Myrtle's moods? She made a decision that she'd still be nice to Myrtle, but not go out of her way to be her friend. She felt much better. Later that evening, Hermione, Ron, and Harry were sitting near the Gryffindor common room's fireplace. Hermione mentioned Myrtle's gossip about Sir Nicholas. Yes, exclaimed Harry. Funny you should mention that. I saw Nearly Headless Nick this morning, and he told me all about the Headless Hunt. He was so upset. But then he invited me to his death day party. I guess it's like how we celebrate for our birthdays, but ghosts celebrate their death days. I was going to ask you both if you wanted to come with me. A death day party? Said Hermione keenly. I bet there aren't many living people who can say they've been to one of those. It will be fascinating. Why would anyone want to celebrate the day they died? Said Ron, who was halfway through his potions homework and grumpy. Sounds dead depressing to me. Hermione rolled her eyes and pulled out her parchment and quill. The rain was still lashing the windows, which were now inky black, but all looked bright and cheerful inside. The firelight glowed over the countless squashy armchairs where people sat reading, talking, doing homework, or in the case of Fred and George Weasley, trying to find out what would happen if you fed a filibuster firework to a salamander. Fred had rescued the brilliant orange fire-dwelling lizard from a care of the magical creatures class, and it was now smoldering gently on a table, surrounded by a knot of curious people. The salamander suddenly whizzed into the air, emitting loud sparks and bangs as it whirled wildly around the room. The sight of Percy bellowing himself hoarse at Fred and George, the spectacular display of tangerine stars showering from the salamander's mouth, and its escape into the fire with accompanying explosions made it nearly impossible for Hermione to get any work done. She put her work back into her bag with a sigh and quizzed Harry some more about Sir Nicholas' Death Day celebration. She was very excited about the opportunity to experience yet another new wizarding adventure. One night at supper, Hermione found herself sitting alone, rereading Break with a Banshee in the Great Hall. Harry had been called away for an emergency Quidditch practice, and Ron had forgotten the 3-foot essay on the dangers of pufferfish eyes Snape had assigned entirely, so he was stuck in the library. Hermione refused to help him because he shouldn't have put it off so long. Also, 3 feet wasn't hard at all. Hermione had written 7. Hermione didn't mind sitting alone. In fact, it was quite lovely to get some uninterrupted reading in. After a few minutes, however, Parvati plopped down opposite of Hermione and was joined by Justin Finch-Fletchley. Hermione raised her eyebrows at Parvati, who blushed and smiled slightly. Hey, Hermione, do you know Justin? Parvati said with a wink. Hermione tried to go along with whatever Parvati was trying to do, since she had already told Parvati she knew Justin. We've met in a herbology, Hermione said, but put out her hand to shake anyway. Nice to meet you again, Justin said, and accepted the handshake. Lovely, that book, by the way. I think that was one of Lockhart's best, yeah? Oh, I agree, Hermione said eagerly. Sometimes I think he likes Lockhart more than me, Parvati said and giggled. He's braver and smarter, that's for sure. But you're prettier, Justin grinned. Hermione frowned slightly. That didn't seem like a particularly sweet compliment, but what did Hermione know? Justin's been helping me study for Lockhart's class, Parvati said. I've been finding it so much more interesting than last year. Much better than Quirrell, that's for sure, Justin said. The bloke was scared of his own shadow. What are you doing? Slumming it at the lion's table? Ernie Macmillan's voice boomed from behind Hermione. She spun her head round. Ernie and Hannah Abbott, 2 other Hufflepuffs, were standing behind Hermione. Ernie had a mischievous smirk on his face. "Just kidding," he said. But Hermione didn't really think he was kidding at all. She pushed the thought of the clerk at Flourish and Bloods out of her head. "Hi, Hermione," Hannah said in a small voice with a smile. "Hi, Anna," Hermione smiled back. "We were just about to head back to the common room to play Exploding Snap. You coming?" Ernie said. "Yeah, I'll be there in a minute," Justin said. "Let me finish my pie first, mate." "Well, hurry up. Spend too much time with the lions and you'll be trying to single-handedly save the wizarding world with just a shoelace and quill or something." Hermione laughed loudly. Justin grunted a laugh before taking another shovelful of pie. "Don't be an arse," Parvati said hot-headedly. Hermione was somewhat relieved Parvati beat her to it. All she had wanted was a nice, quiet dinner with her book. "Oh, come off it. You know I'm just joking," Hermione said. "Don't get yourself in a teasy." "I won't have to get myself in a teasy if you just shut your mouth," Parvati challenged. "You got a hot-headed one there, mate," Ernie said to Justin with a smirk. "Don't talk about my friend like that," Hermione spat. She couldn't sit quietly any longer. "Relax," Ernie said. "You Gryffindors can't take a joke, can you?" "It was kind of mean," Anna said in a voice barely louder than a whisper. She looked at Hermione with an apologetic look. "Come on, let's just go back to the common room. Justin will be there soon. I'll play you until he gets back." Ernie scoffed, but followed Hannah out of the great hall. Hermione and Parvati shared a look and then turned towards Justin. "Way to stand up for me, Justin," Parvati snapped. "I couldn't very well say anything with a loaf of pie in my mouth now, could I?" "That's not an excuse," Parvati said with a frown. "He's certainly not very nice," Hermione said. "Oh, Ernie means well. He just likes to joke around a lot." "I wouldn't call that joking," Parvati said. "That was pretty mean-spirited." "I'm sorry, I'll give him a talking to when I get back to the common room if you want," Justin sighed, though Hermione didn't think he meant it. October seemed to fly by. Before they knew it, it was Halloween. It was also the day of Sir Nicholas' Death Day celebration. Hermione was so excited to be going to such a unique event filled with so much history. The oral histories alone from all of the ghosts in attendance would be a treasure trove of knowledge. Hermione barely talked herself out of taking a quill and parchment to write everything she had learned down. Harry and Ron, on the other hand, were not as excited. The rest of the school were happily anticipating their Halloween feast. The great hall had been decorated with the usual live bats. Hagrid's vast pumpkins had been carved into lanterns large enough for 3 men to sit in, and there were rumors that Dumbledore had booked a troupe of dancing skeletons for the entertainment. Apparently, that seemed more exciting to Ron and Harry, which Hermione couldn't understand in the least. "A promise is a promise," Hermione reminded Harry. "You said you'd go to the Death Day party." So at precisely 7 o'clock, Hermione, Harry, and Ron walked straight past the doorway to the packed great hall, which was glittering invitingly with gold plates and candles, and directed their steps instead towards the dungeons. The passageway leading to Nearly Headless Nick's party had been lined with candles too, though the effect was far from cheerful. These were long, thin, jet-black tapers, all burning bright blue, casting a dim, ghostly light even over their own living faces. The temperature dropped with every step they took. Hermione shivered but was intrigued and kept moving down the corridor. As they continued, they heard what sounded like 1,000 fingernails scraping an enormous blackboard. "Is that supposed to be music?" Ron whispered. Hermione shushed him. They turned the corner and saw Sir Nicholas standing at a doorway hung with black velvet drapes. My dear friends, he said mournfully, welcome, welcome, so pleased you could come. He swept off his plumed hat and bowed them inside. Hermione gasped. It was an incredible sight. The dungeon was full of hundreds of pearly white, translucent people, mostly drifting around the crowded dance floor, waltzing to the dreadful, quavering sound of 30 musical saws played by an orchestra on a raised, black-draped platform. A chandelier overhead blazed midnight blue with 1,000 more black candles. Their breath rose in a mist before them. It was like stepping into a freezer. Shall we have a look around? Harry suggested. Hermione shivered, but shook her head, determined to persevere. Careful not walk through anyone, said Ron nervously, and they set off around the edge of the dance floor. They passed a group of gloomy nuns, a ragged man wearing chains, and the fat friar, a cheerful Hufflepuff ghost, who was talking to a knight with an arrow sticking out of his forehead. Hermione wasn't supposed to see that the Bloody Baron, Hermione wasn't surprised to see that the Bloody Baron, a gaunt, staring Slytherin ghost covered in silver bloodstains, was being given a wide berth by the other spirits. Towards the back of the group of ghosts, Hermione saw a squat, translucent girl in Ravenclaw robes and glasses. Myrtle. Oh no, said Hermione with a groan. Turn back, turn back. I don't want to talk to Moaning Myrtle. Who? Said Harry as they backtracked quickly. She haunts one of the toilets in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, said Hermione. She haunts a toilet? Hermione quickly realized that she didn't want to tell Harry and Ron about all of the times she had spent with Myrtle. She wasn't exactly sure why, but she was quite certain it was a secret she wanted to keep to herself. Yes, it's been out of order all year because she keeps having tantrums and flooding the place, she said, starting to rumble. I never went in there anyway, if I could avoid it. It's awful trying to have a pee with her wailing at you. Look, food, said Ron. Hermione had never been so excited to be interrupted by Ron talking about food in her life. On the other side of the dungeon was a long table, also covered in black velvet. The three friends approached it eagerly, but stopped suddenly in their tracks, horrified. The smell was quite disgusting. Large, rotten fish were laid on handsome silver platters. Cakes, burned charcoal black, were heaped on salvers. There was a great maggoty haggis, a slab of cheese covered in fuzzy green mold, and, in pride of place, an enormous grey cake in the shape of a tombstone, with tar-like icing forming the words, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, died 31st October 1492. The three friends watched amazed as a portly ghost approached the table, crouched low, and walked through it, his mouth held wide so that it passed through one of the stinking salmon. Can you taste it if you walk through it? Harry asked him. Almost, said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. I expect they've let it rot to give it a stronger flavor, said Hermione, pinching her nose and leaning closer to look at the putrid haggis. Can we move? I feel sick, said Ron. They had barely turned around, however, when a little man swooped suddenly from under the table and came to a halt in mid-air before them. Hello, Peeves, said Harry cautiously. Unlike the ghosts around them, Peeves the poltergeist was the very reverse of pale and transparent. He was wearing a bright orange party hat, a revolving bow tie, and a broad grin on his wide, wicked face. Nibbles, he said sweetly, offering them a bowl of peanuts covered in fungus. No, thank you, said Hermione, her stomach turning. Heard you talking about poor Myrtle, said Peeves, his eyes dancing. Rude you was about poor Myrtle. He took a deep breath and bellowed, Oi, Myrtle! Oh, no, Peeves, don't tell her what I said. She'll be really upset, Hermione whispered frantically as her anxiety started to bubble up. I didn't mean it. No, I don't mind her. Hello, Myrtle. What? She said sulkily. How are you, Myrtle? Said Hermione in a falsely bright voice that she hoped Myrtle would believe. It's nice to see you out of the toilet. Myrtle sniffed. Hermione knew Myrtle was probably angry at her for not coming back and begging for forgiveness. Still, she didn't feel like getting into it with Myrtle. She knew too many of her secrets. Miss Granger was just talking about you, said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. Hermione's heart started to pound. Just saying how nice you look tonight, said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione suspiciously. You're making fun of me, she said, silver tears welling rapidly in her small, see-through eyes. No, honestly, didn't I just say how nice Myrtle looking? Said Hermione, nudging Harry and Ron painfully in the ribs, hoping desperately they'd get the hint. Myrtle was so sensitive, and if she believed Hermione had been talking about her, she'd never hear the end of it, especially after how they had left things the last time. Oh, yeah, she did. Don't lie to me, Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle. You've forgotten Pimply, Peeves hissed in her ear. Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, Pimply, Pimply! Oh dear, said Hermione sadly. She felt positively horrible. Luckily, Nearly Headless Nick now drifted towards them through the crowd, distracting Hermione a bit from Myrtle. Enjoying yourselves? Oh, yes, they lied. Not a bad turnout, said Sir Nicholas proudly. The Wailing Widow came all the way up from Kent. It's nearly time for my speech. I'd better go and warn the orchestra. The orchestra, however, stopped playing at that very moment. They, and everyone else in the dungeon, fell silent, looking around in excitement as a hunting horn sounded. Oh, here we go, said Nearly Headless Nick bitterly. Through the dungeon wall burst a dozen ghost horses, each ridden by a headless horseman. The assembly clapped wildly. Hermione and Harry both started to clap, but stopped quickly at the sight of Nick's face. Hermione quickly realized they must be the headless hunt that had rejected Sir Nicholas. The horses galloped into the middle of the dance floor and halted, rearing and plunging. At the front of the pack was a large ghost who held his bearded head under his arm, from which position he was blowing the horn. The ghost slipped down, lifted his head high in the air so he could see over the crowd. Everyone laughed, and strode over to Sir Nicholas, squashing his head back onto his neck. Nick, he roared. How are you? Head still hanging in there? He gave a hearty guffaw and clapped Nearly Headless Nick on the shoulder. Welcome, Patrick, said Nick stiffly. Live ones, said Sir Patrick, spotting Hermione, Harry, and Ron and giving a huge fake jump of astonishment so that his head fell off again. The crowd howled with laughter. Very amusing, said Nearly Headless Nick darkly. Don't mind Nick, shouted Sir Patrick's head from the floor. Still upset we won't let him join the hunt. But I mean to say, look at the fellow. I think, said Harry hurriedly, at a meaningful look from Nick. Nick's very frightening, and yelled Sir Patrick's head. Bet he asked you to say that. Sir Nicholas had indeed asked Harry to say that. If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for my speech, said Sir Nicholas loudly, striding towards the podium and climbing into an icy blue spotlight. Hermione felt terrible for him. "My late lamented lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great sorrow." But nobody heard much more. Sir Patrick and the rest of the Headless Hunt had just started a game of head hockey, and the crowd were turning to watch. Nearly Headless Nick tried vainly to recapture his audience, but gave up as Sir Patrick's head went sailing past him to loud cheers. It was absolutely heartbreaking to watch. "I can't stand much more of this," Ron muttered, his teeth chattering as the orchestra ground back into action and the ghosts swept back onto the dance floor. "Let's go," Harry agreed. Hermione was glad she didn't have to be the one to suggest it. They backed towards the door, nodding and beaming at anyone who looked at them, and a minute later were hurrying back up the passageway full of black candles. "Pudding might not be finished yet," said Ron hopefully, leading the way towards the step to the entrance hall. Harry suddenly stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone hole. Hermione nearly ran into the back of him. "Harry, what are you?" Ron asked. "It's that voice again. Shut up a minute. Listen," said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. Harry snapped his head upward. A mixture of fear and excitement crossed his face as he stared at the dark ceiling. Hermione was transfixed in fear. She had never seen Harry so terrified. "This way," he shouted, and he began to run up the stairs into the entrance hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron and Hermione clattering behind him. "Harry, what are we?" Hermione started saying. "Shh!" Hermione strained her ears, but couldn't hear whatever Harry was hearing. "It's going to kill someone," Harry shouted, and ignoring Ron's and Hermione's bewildered faces, he ran up the next flight of steps, 3 at a time. Ron looked at Hermione and took off after Harry. Hermione rushed to keep up. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, and Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned a corner into the last deserted passage. "Harry, what was that about?" said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. "I couldn't hear anything." But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. "Look!" Something was shining on the wall ahead. The 3 friends approached slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words had been daubed on the wall between 2 windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." "What's that thing hanging underneath?" said Ron, a slight quiver in his voice. As they edged nearer, Harry almost slipped. There was a large puddle of water on the floor. Ron and Hermione grabbed him, and they inched toward the message, eyes fixed on a dark shadow beneath it. All 3 of them realized what it was at once, and leapt backward with a splash. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board, her eyes wide and staring. For a few seconds they didn't move. Then Ron said, "Let's get out of here." "Shouldn't we try and help?" Harry began awkwardly. "Trust me," said Ron. "We don't want to be found here." Hermione had to agree with Ron and turned to leave. But it was too late. A rumble, as though of distant thunder, told them that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where they stood came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. The next moment, students were crashing into the passage from both ends. The chatter, the bustle, the noise died suddenly as the people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood alone in the middle of the corridor as silence fell amongst the mass of students, pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, "Enemies of the air beware! You'll be next, mudbloods." It was Draco Malfoy. Hermione's heart fell to her feet.